Of course. And thanks everyone for joining. This is the first in what we hope will be a number of online/virtual events hosted by ABFO. In particular, this is the Boston chapter of ABFO hosting. And we thought this was an interesting topic, and I'm excited to let Slava do the more formal introductions here. But in the meantime, after this event is over, we'd love feedback. So honestly, we encourage anyone to please email or reach out to myself or Slava with feedback, not only on this particular topic, but also just on the format to see if this is something that would be of interest on a go-forward basis. Obviously, again, as I mentioned, looking to do more of these as we continue to move forward. And if folks have ideas or suggestions on topics, we'd love to hear about those as well. And with that, Slava, I'll turn it over to you for the more formal introduction of Tim, and looking forward to the session.
Thank you. Thank you. So, colleagues, this is our first online event, as John mentioned. I'm asking for your patience with potential technical difficulties, which I'm sure we'll encounter. We are recording this session, so we'll share that with all the people who signed up, and feel free to share it with your colleagues. Please post your questions to the chat side. If you want to test that, that's great. I will be collecting them and maybe channeling them to Tim after the sort of the 30, 40 minutes presentation. And with that, let me make an introduction for our speaker, Tim Glennon, who founded Illumination Strategy Group. Overall, he has 27 years of experience in pharma industry. The consulting firm he started specializes in strategic commercial guidance, small, medium-sized biopharma companies. Tim has extensive expertise that spans multiple therapeutic areas. His career includes roles at Bayer, Teva, Avafam, Veru, and among others, where he launched about 13 pharma products. So he knows what he's talking about. His diverse background on a commercial side between sales and marketing and operations and clinical development, manufacturing strategy. I think that, without further ado, Tim, please take it over.
Thanks, Slava. Let me make sure that I can share my screen first and foremost, and then we'll get underway. So I think everybody can see my screen, correct?
Yes, it's up.
Oh, okay, perfect. So first of all, I want to say thanks to John and Slava again for the opportunity. And wow, I didn't realize I was going to be the first session, so I'm sure you'll have a lot of feedback afterwards. But anyways, what I really want to do today is take hopefully about 20 to 25 minutes and walk through a couple slides, and then really spend more time in a discussion of answering any questions. But the first thing I want to do is really make sure that we understand that what the agenda is. And so I'm going to spend a little time talking about the asset team, a little bit of level setting. We're going to talk about where to play and how to win. I'm going to share a quick story. From there, we're going to talk a little bit about the early stage fundamental approach of what many small to medium pharma companies, some have, some don't have. And then we'll talk a little bit more, just very briefly, about long-term success. And then we'll talk about some success behaviors that I've seen. I'm sure others have some to share as well. And then we'll open up for Q&A. So what I want to talk about first is a little bit of a story. A couple of weeks ago, I was actually speaking to an old colleague of mine who worked at J&J several years ago. And we were talking a little bit about what Illuminations did. And we were, what he shared with me is this siloed approach to drug development. And what he really was sharing is early in the early days, what you can see here is that, science, or when drug development really started happening, what you saw were science teams and regulatory teams really taking a siloed approach to drug development. And what happened over the days is, as products kept coming through the J&J pipeline, one day the commercial team got a product that was thrown over the fence to them at phase 3 and said, let's go sell this thing. And commercial said, whoa. They stopped them in their tracks and said, look, we need to get more clinical data for product, for product value propositions to payers, to your target audiences, so on and such. And so what ended up happening is they had to go back, and it led to a delay. That delay obviously has significant impacts for organizations, from decreased peak revenues, peak net sales, obviously a potential decreased NPV, and things of that nature from a financial perspective. But also what it really taught J&J at the same time is that they needed to take a combined approach. So when they, after this had taken place, what they decided moving forward, and it was piloted in the United States, was that they were also going to start including a commercial representative. And by combining this approach, as what you see here on the slide, when you take marketing and you take the clinic, the science team, and you take the regulatory team, what you really start to develop is a more all-encompassing type strategy. As a result of when J&J did this, the first two assets, that they delivered were multi-billion-dollar assets. Since this time, J&J has been implementing this worldwide, and it's still ongoing today. I share this with you as a story because this is a commonality that I see today within the pharma space, especially with smaller companies, especially some of the clients I'm even talking to today. So as we talk a little bit about what we're going to get into, I want to give one more sort of slide just to set a base so everybody's working from reading from the same hymnal, if you will. So the way I look at drug development and from a commercial perspective is two ways. The first phase of it is where to play. And as you can see here, what we're really trying to do when we talk about where to play is we're trying to understand the market. We're trying to understand the competitors within the market. We're trying to understand what the future pipeline looks like. What are the current treatment dynamics? What are the clinical performance thresholds? Because all of these things are going to play a very important role in what we understand to potentially be the coverage and reimbursement path. But more importantly, what this does is as you start to look at the asset and you start to understand what your priority markets are, you can start sequencing the indications. And what that really leads to at the end is organizational alignment. And we'll talk a little bit more about organizational alignment in a minute and what that really means. As you get later, phase 2 and beyond, really companies start to switch towards the how to win piece. That's really for most people, at least what I run into today, really is your traditional sales and marketing, messaging prioritization, sales and marketing tactics, sales force deployment. There's some market access tactics tied into that as well. But we're not going to really spend too much time today on the how to win. I'm happy to answer any questions. I've done it for 27 years. But I really want to spend more time today talking about the where to play. So looking at the fundamental approach of what really is critical for small to medium-sized companies today is really thinking about this in a methodical approach. And so the first piece that we'll talk about here in a minute in a little bit more detail is market profiling. You really need to understand your market to really understand where you're going to go and the product you're going to develop. You'll probably hear me say this multiple times today: science is great, science is great. And unfortunately, that no longer can just be the case. Many scientists and clinicians, healthcare providers, and a lot of the small startup companies we see today are doctors or clinicians who have a really nice, some sort of nice potential therapeutic for some certain category. Problem is they don't really take a look at the full market, and too often what we find happening is that the asset never achieves success, meaning getting to market, treating patients, because of poor strategy. As important as the target product profile, I cannot reiterate the importance, and I know you see TPP on the slide, but that stands for target product profile. The target product profile is a document for market research that includes really important pieces such as product descriptions, the mechanisms of action, indications, dosing, efficacy, things, and cost. And what you really try to do with this is you really try to understand how the market's going to react to the asset, the potential asset, once it comes to market. And what you really do is you work with your clinical team and your regulatory team, and you really try to develop these profiles that you're going to go test for a couple of reasons. One, you need to know you can hopefully get it over the line with the FDA and actually make the stuff. But more importantly, it's also to understand what the commercial picture looks like. All of that bubbles up into a forecast. And then obviously from there, as you get a little bit later, you can start to assess the different strategies, which we'll talk about a little bit more, which obviously for everybody on this call is vitally important, is resource allocation. So talking a little bit more about the market profiling, I've said some of it already. You need to have a deep understanding of the target market. It's critical to the success of an organization and a startup company. Too often today, two companies I'm working with said, "Oh yeah, it's a $35 billion market." I mean, if anybody has a $35 billion asset today, I would love to know who they are, because I don't know of too many. And, when I sat with these new companies, I had to say to them, guys, but you need to really look at it from the point of view of what you can actually pull out of that market. And to do that, you need to understand some key pieces. Obviously, we've talked about a couple of these. I won't read the slide to you, but the unmet need is critically important, as important. And I'll go back to the J&J story. They had the clinical performance thresholds, but what they didn't understand was the market access environment. They didn't understand some of the key metrics that were going to be required for payers and the health economic story to really make the product commercially viable. Shifting gears a little bit to talk about the target product profiles, again, I want to reiterate the target product profile is so important. It's really a strategic roadmap for both clinical and launch planning and the organization overall, because it helps to ensure organizational alignment and serves as the communication platform for many fronts. For many of you on the call today, it helps with your IR audience, your investor relations messaging. I can tell you firsthand, 2 companies ago, we raised a significant amount of money, over $400 million. And, a lot of it was faced on, and a lot of it was, a lot of our efforts were focused on really understanding the market, leveraging the target product profiles, helping the investors to understand why these target product profiles the target product profile, that we were using was going to be successful. And in turn, we were very successful in raising funds. But as important, and we'll get to in a minute, is the next key piece, and probably one of my what's most important to me and gets me excited, is the financial modeling. But as important as that is, what I really want everybody to see and look at this slide is it's bringing the clinical team and the marketing team together. And that's going to be critically important. And in the success of the organization, go back to the J&J models and story I told you early on. It was very siloed. And I can tell you firsthand, my days in big pharma were also very siloed. And so, when you really look at it today's model says we got to bring everybody together, and we need to do it sooner rather than later.
Tim, can I just build on make one point too? Because in my world, the TPPs are sort of often first looked at, right? I work in market research, and a lot of times teams don't even realize they need a TPP until they say, well, we need market research. And it really is sort of like this, almost like this contract between what the science believes it can deliver on and what the marketing team thinks that they can actually commercialize. And you play out multiple scenarios is the whole idea, because there's so much uncertainty. So you factor that into the process. But I guess one way I think about it is like, it's very hard to do anything on the commercial analytics side if you don't know what it is that you're talking about. And the TPP is sort of, this is what it is, and this is what we are intending to sell. And that's critical. And so I hate to over-romanticize it after Tim already romanticized it, but just from my world in market research, we see this a lot. And we have to take teams through this process a lot just to get to the point where you can do the market research, because the market research might depend on having TPPs.
Moving on to the last piece of this is really creating the financial model. And, this is to me where the fun really starts to begin. is, when you look at the left-hand side of the slide and the importance of market research is, it's really going to help you understand the technical risks, or pardon me, the market risks. But as important are the technical risks. Many of you have probably heard of the probability of technical and regulatory success. And, and some of the haircuts along the way as you go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 2 to phase 3, the risk changes. But all of that really informs the risk, which is critical to the strategies. So as David mentioned earlier in regards to the market research, it really helps to inform the risks, which helps you inform your strategies. But the fun part is the value. And so when you really understand what's going on across the model, what it really builds is a flexible framework to assess your assumptions that help to build the best outcomes. Some of those can be assessed through the tornado models that you see on the right with the red and green, lines there. You can understand what the opportunity is, what the potential risk is. Is it positive? Is it negative? What's going to be the swing in financial value? Things of that nature. And so by doing this and really building these models, it's an objective tool. It's an objective tool that takes the heart out of making the right decision for the organization. And now I don't want people to think I'm emotionless, but what it really does is it sort of sets people's, oh my God, I love this product. The old saying I used to have when I was in marketing, nobody says their baby's ugly. But what it really does is it takes all of that, sets it on the shelf for a second. And what it really looks at is what objectively is the best path forward for the organization. What's critical about that today, and why this model and why using the J&J model is so important today, is because raising money is difficult. Rattling the tin is really hard. I've been there, I've done it. And what really these models do is two things. One, they help you to define what your best path forward is. Two, they help you communicate what your best path forward is. Three, they stand up to any investor testing. I can't tell you how many banks and how many hours I was up late at night meeting with banks who we were supposed to close on the deal the next day. And, we had a lot of questions, but this just informs the asset. What it does do is layer into your more organizational financial model. So everything I'm looking at here from a financial model perspective, to clarify, is an asset-related financial model. It's not anything that you as CFOs have seen on the bigger scale where it informs all of the financial picture and really layers into the P&L. But that being said, creating these models is such I don't want to understate, I don't want to overstate, but I also don't want to understate. Using these models to be objective tools and to frame your decision-making process is critical to company success today, and I anticipate it will be in the future. As important, looking more longer term down the road, is I don't want people to think that the need to continue assessing commercial situations and assumptions isn't ongoing. It is ongoing. Looking at things like marketing spend and sales force allocations, those are all things that you can throw into these models to really assess where you want to be. Obviously, a key driver of any product lift is awareness. Awareness on the HCP level, awareness on the consumer level, and excuse me. And all of that can be assessed as you're moving forward. In today's time, I don't think there's too many assets that are just going to get gobbled up by big pharma like they were in the days past and in the years past when I started. Most often what I'm seeing today is companies who are considering in licensing an asset want to see it go through some sort of market, some sort of commercial launch, some sort of potential, to show that there's demand, show that this product really has legs. And so to do that, you can really leverage these models to build those type of strategies and assessments. And again, they're always objective, they're numbers based. You can always update them as you're getting more research, as you're getting more data, you're throwing it into the model, which is only making it smarter, which is only helping you make those tough resource allocation decisions. On a bigger picture, looking at these companies and thinking about financial strategies, one of the things that I really wanted to share with everybody is this is just my scenario. At my company, we went through, I think we were out to Series E when we finally had the funding we needed. But really what I want people to understand is the importance of getting commercial and getting the right commercial strategic input early. It really helps shape the corporate strategy. As you can see on the left-hand side of this slide in the darker blue, market profiling, target product profile development, early forecasts, access strategies, position strategies, life cycle management, i.e. indication sequencing, are all critical activities for companies who are early stage to be considering and to leveraging commercial input early on to have the best chance for success organizationally and for your stockholders. As you look out a little bit later in the how to win piece, I didn't spend much time here, but this is more of your marketing, if you will, standard blocking and tackling, where you're thinking about things like pricing strategy, messaging strategy, sales force, and communication strategies. So one of the questions that came up during with Slava, we were talking about this before earlier this week, was, in regards to a commercial readiness timeline, what do I think is the right recommendation with regards to when you need fractional expertise versus when you need to really start thinking about, full-time FTEs? And so what you can see here is, I think most often in today's world, let me start by saying there is a lot of experts out there who are doing fractional work, offering consulting from a commercial basis at all different levels and functionalities within the organization, within a pharmaceutical organization. But what I would really recommend is, I don't really think, in my opinion, is that you don't really need a chief commercial officer and really start needing to think about building out the commercial team till probably around phase 2. Reason being, as you can see right above it, that's when you really start getting into the marketing and tackling, or blocking and tackling, pardon me, from the sales and marketing strategies and tactics. And to have a CCO who has as a lead for commercial myself, you want to have input into those. So I think really around phase 2 is the right time to think about a CCO. But the next most important person, because your medical science liaison team may already be on board as your market access lead, because they need to get into the payer, start preparing pre-information exchange decks, things of that nature. Operations wise, I put it a little bit later out because there's a lot of decisions to be made. Are you going to go through a phased launch approach? Are you going to really just go all out? What's your longer term plan? Are you trying to sell the asset, or are you really thinking you're going to go it yourself and really build out a commercial organization? A lot of different strategic decisions are made at that point, and commercial operations is just a little bit further down the road. And obviously your CCO is going to be involved in those discussions. But I would say pre-IND phase 1, even into a little bit of phase 2, you're fine to use fractional sort of commercial leadership. It's something that I do. You also can get other consultants to do it. Like I said, there's a pool of talent out there right now. But, from my point of view, this is what is critically important in the early phases of drug development. And if you're a company who's pre-IND phase 1, even phase 2, if you're phase 2, I would highly recommend starting to think about these things now. Because if you're out raising money, I think some of the questions you're going to get asked is, what is your pricing strategy? And I can't tell you how many times I've seen a great asset fall on its face because they don't have a pricing strategy. They go and get 4 or 5 indications, have spent significant money to develop this asset, only to find out that the payers aren't going to pay for it. Last but not least, talking about some successful behaviors. Again, you've heard me say it a few times. Great science doesn't guarantee commercial success. And as I just said a minute ago, I won't repeat it. You need to understand how that innovation is going to translate into commercial market success, and more importantly, how it's going to be commercially viable. 4 indications may not be better than 1. FDA approval is never straightforward. My last 2 companies, I can tell you that firsthand. I guess the best way to say it is we had no indication that we were going to get CRLs, and in each company we got one. In the second company, we got a CRL after investing significant resources into building a sales force, almost $90 to $100 million over the course of a year, which is against my recommendation, but the owners went their own way anyways, and decided to make that decision against my advice. Commercial analytics insights are a downstream problem. I think after this presentation, I hope that you see they're not a downstream problem. You really need to be thinking about them early and often. And one of the ones that I always think is interesting is focusing on speed versus cost to market. I know every CEO I've worked for in a small company has always said, hey, how quickly can we get there? How quickly can we get there? Can we do it shorter? Can we do it shorter? Yes, speed is important, but I would also encourage you to be very deliberate and be deliberate in developing the key strategies that are going to ensure success. And sometimes a couple months delay may actually mean you're more profitable and get to the market more quick and be more effective in the market versus doing it in a hasty fashion. Using forecast numbers as generators, obviously, I've seen this in my own experience in 2 companies ago, and number forecasts, we've got to be super careful with the way we use forecast. Really what this is they're strategic options, especially when it comes to a product asset that's new to market. And too often I've seen people try to take a forecast, or they take a $35 billion number that they've seen somewhere online and really try to turn it into that's what's going to be the potential opportunity for this brand or asset that's coming to market. And obviously, last but not least, as I shared with the J&J story, a lack of communication between clinical and commercial side cannot continue any further. We have to have dialogue. The best chance of success for an organization, especially startup, medium size today, is to be working in tandem. The best organizations today are doing that, and I think there's probably many of you on this call who are and see that that interplay between the commercial functions and the clinical functions, and hopefully all of you are seeing that today. But if not, I would encourage you to do that. So with that, I'm going to stop. I want to say thank you to John and Slava for the opportunity. I want to thank everybody for their attention to this discussion. My contact information is here. I will try to drop it in the chat if I can figure that out. If not, you can reach out to Slava or you can reach me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So at this moment, I see a few questions popped up on chat. It's preferred if you could post them there. If anybody wants to ask live, go ahead and unmute yourself and raise your hand. So maybe I'll start with the question from Neil. It says, what are the critical path items to focus on prior to hiring a CCO? And follow-up question, any 3PLs that you recommend or not, and why?
Oh man, let me start with the first part. I'm going to go backwards a little bit, Neil, to your question. I think some of the things that you want to be thinking about early and often, as I said earlier, is you really want to think about what does the current landscape look like in regards to the asset you're developing? What's the competitive environment look like? For me, I would say today, and others may have a different opinion, I think access is the most important understanding of today's drug development challenges. You need to understand what the payers are going to do. I can tell you 2 companies ago, we probably spoke to companies that represented payers who represented over 250 million lives in the United States. As an FYI, there's about 350 million. So you would have thought we had a good N and a large sample size of what was going to happen. We were expecting 60 to 70% coverage within 6 to 9 months post-launch. We didn't get that at all. In fact, the payers changed their perspective altogether. And so one of the things that for me that's critically important is understanding the access strategy and understanding the pricing that you think you're going to be able to get. And because things are changing quickly in the payer world, and unfortunately, good science is prevented from getting to patients because of payers. I don't know how else to say it. I'm not trying to vilify payers, but unfortunately, they have a significant amount of control. Regarding your the second part of that question, in regards to 3PLs, I've used them all. I would tell you today that I don't personally think it's the best strategy to leverage a 3PL. Well, you have to leverage a 3PL, but I try to avoid using the big three from a distribution perspective. I personally think, if you can, it depends on the product again, but if specialty pharmacy is an option, it's a much more efficient option. It's just a hard question to answer without understanding the product itself. I'd be more than happy to speak with you offline and have a little bit of a better understanding. I can tell you firsthand, I've built hubs. I built 2 of them. I've done specialty pharmacy approaches. I've done the traditional retail, have your 3PL go through the big three. The problem with the big three is small pharma gets screwed because you have very little negotiating power, and they just take a significant chunk of your whack. I think my last company, it was 12%. Company before that, we were able to get to 10%. And if you're not big pharma, you don't get the single digits. And I think what I saw, if I remember correctly, Cardinal, which was my last 3PL, they were announcing price increases that I think were going to take us into the 13% range of WAC as a 3PL fee, which is just astronomical. But I'm happy to talk to you further about that offline.
It's a rare disease oncology, if that helps.
Rare disease oncology, I would, I'll tell you, Neil, in that case, I would probably consider a hub. I know some really good people out there who've set up some hubs. If you need one, let me know. I'll connect you with them offline. I would probably really think going down the hub route. You may be able to avoid your 3PL. I will assure you, from a financial perspective, it would be much more beneficial than going through the traditional distribution channels. Happy to talk about that offline.
All right, thanks.
Yep. We have a couple of questions here. Lauren asked for a smaller biotech, 4 to 6 potential products. Any recommendations on ERP? But since you're on the commercial side, unless you want to jump at that question, maybe we can save it for another discussion, because that's more a CFO question. And then there is
Thanks, Slava. Yeah, I'm gonna pass on that. I'll say, Slava, can you answer that?
Yes, we'll get back to that on that question. There is a potential grenade in the room question, which I love, of course, but feel free to thread carefully. How do you think about the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on commercial strategy?
Wow. My gosh. I don't know that. I mean, look, I read probably as much as everybody else does on what's going on there. I don't really have a good answer for it. I think what's really interesting is we've got to see how payers are going to react to all of this. I don't have a good answer on the Inflation Reduction Act and what's going to happen. If somebody else has an opinion, please feel free to. I just haven't really developed a good opinion. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I just don't have a good position on it. I really try to pay more attention to it from a pricing strategy perspective. And, right now, from what I can see, is there's just a lot of unknown. And, I know that even some of the vendors that I worked with when I was in pharma are still trying to develop POVs on how this is going to play out from a rebate perspective. And it's just it's typical government, right? They put all this stuff out and nobody really knows what it means. And you have to wade through all of the pages of minutia to finally figure out what the impact is going to be.
Let me ask you an easier question, just to give you a little bit of a break. Because you played both sides, can you speak on sort of benefits and maybe challenges that companies to think about in making decision on fractional CCO versus hiring a consulting firm like yours?
Well, I mean, look, obviously the first thing I would say is, if you want to, pardon the PSA here, but if you needed fractional commercial support, I could do that as well. And we can definitely do that. But, the beauty of fractional support or any fractional support is this, it gives you two things. It gives you flexibility, right? But it also is going to give you the strategic expertise you need. And so one of the things that I like about that I think really supports the fractional model is that, you don't have to make this investment in a full-time equivalent and get the expertise that you're really looking for. And at the same time, if you're saying, hey, I want to try somebody before I'm going to buy somebody, it gives you the opportunity to do that as well. And so, when you really look at fractional versus an FTE perspective, that's the value of fractional leadership. Whether you use Illumination Strategy Group and choose them as a consult, choose us to consult with you, or we can obviously also come in and I can come in and serve as your fractional officer if that's what you choose. But it's really dependent on what the company is looking at. And my recommendation is you don't need to think about somebody early on. You really should think about using somebody like myself. I know there's another person on the phone, one other person who I'm associated with who does fractional work as well. And I think this is a model people really need to start looking at, because as you're trying to find ways to cost cut and you need the expertise, it's out there. And you don't need to be paying full-time equivalent, full-time salaries and benefits and things like that to get the expertise. And most importantly, I think can't go without saying, is you're going to get objective feedback. It's not, look, oh my God, I got to worry about what Slava thinks. Oh, I got to worry about what John thinks or David thinks. You're going to get the best feedback because it's what's best for your success in the organization. And sometimes you can take the political point of view out of it because you're not having to worry about walking down the hallway and having an argument.
I think I would certainly second that point, Tim, you made, at least on my side, is I've done the same thing as you have done, both sides, either fractional support or as a consultant. And I actually feel like as a consultant, I'm a little bit more direct and objective with the feedback versus when I'm involved as a fractional support person. So depending if the company needs, a quick hit or maybe a practical support, they can make a decision. So great. We're still collecting questions, so maybe I'll ask one from the list here, if that's okay.
Yeah, please. I'm just moving you guys so I can actually look at the camera and see faces versus slides.
Yeah. So I was at at one of my potential companies roadshow yesterday, and it kind of triggered the question: when you develop, the marketing commercial strategy, have you dealt with sort of keeping that internal for the board and the leadership versus kind of in helping the company making it more public? How would you think about that? What are the pros and cons, in that decision? And I think it's sort of from that angle, if you would.
Yeah, great question, Slava. Yes, you're always cognizant of putting too much out in public, if you will. One of the arguments that I used to have with ABFO all the time is, our CEO wanted to be as transparent as could be. Everybody wants to be transparent. And we were like, whoa, we've got competitors. You got to be careful about how you're going to do this and what you're going to share. So we were super careful about keeping everything internal. And the only time, even in our, the way we used to devise our investor relations decks, even we were careful. So we would make sure that, people were, as we were going through the process, if they were non-deal roadshows, we were a lot more generic than we were if we were sitting around the table with a potential group in the room that was thinking about investing with us. Very little made it to slides. I was super cautious about when you started thinking about things like your K's and your Q's about what we were going to put in on the corporate structure and things of that nature. We never wanted to say why we were doing what we were doing. We kept everything as close to the vest as we could. And just were, we would high level ballpark things. We would say, hey, look, we're going to spend 10 million on marketing, but we never told them what we were doing. We just left it at that because you don't want to give away, if you will, your secret sauce or competitive intelligence.
Thank you, Tim. If nobody else going to jump in, I'm going to ask one more question then, and it's sort of two parts. What I've experienced is almost two extremes. The very early stage companies that could benefit from pooling that market, that commercial strategy into their development thinking, right? And then I've very recently had a surprisingly large number of requests for companies sort of later in the game. They're in phase 3, they're about to launch a product within a couple of years without a lot of thought and investment into the commercial. So if you think about those two extremes, can you maybe give some advice or sort of practical considerations that they can consider on those two extreme sides?
Yeah, so I think the first question really to address there is to ask why. But I think what I would say to that is first of all, I want to reiterate, one of the things we talked about, one of the pitfalls companies make is thinking that commercial analytics and insights are a downstream problem. And that really sort of references exactly what you're talking about. The importance of having strategies early based on commercial analytics, or what we see are the success behaviors. And what I've seen in my experience are the successful behaviors. And so companies who are further down the road, like I'm going to use that example, Slava, who are phase 3, my gosh, the number one thing they ought to be doing today is starting to figure out what their commercial strategy is going to look like. And to not have any commercial insights is rather scary, because it tells me they're flying blind. And it for me as a potential investor, it really makes me concerned about the success that they're going to have because they're so late to the game. Doesn't mean they can't have it. It's just going to mean they're going to be playing a lot of catch up. In fact, the company I'm working with right now just signed them this week. This is how bad it is. It's a product that's an in-hospital product. They've had it on the market for a year now, and they've sold 5 doses, and they're in some of the biggest hospitals in the country. And I asked them exactly, I said, where's your strategy document? They said, I don't have one. So I'm like, a strategy is like a roadmap. If you don't have a strategy and you don't have a roadmap, how the heck are you going to get from point A to point B? So that to me is, and literally that's a company that I just signed this week, and guess what I'm working on? A corporate strategy document. And so that's how critical it is. But the earlier you bring it in, because the more prepared you're going to be as an organization. Because look, for those of you who are closer to phase 3, you're probably getting some of the price tags to do research, to build marketing assets, to have to do distribution and things of that. It's not an inexpensive endeavor. And, just to pretty much stand up an organization, if you're going to do it yourself, is a couple $1 million. So you really need to start planning a lot sooner. So, unfortunately for that company, I feel they're way behind the 8 ball. And I think what I said sort of supports the rationale for why you want to bring it in sooner.
Anything you want to add on the other side of the extreme? Because that seems to be happening more and more as, I guess, less pharma deals are coming through and the companies are actually facing commercialization, which nobody wants to take too seriously,
Yeah, it's, that's nothing I can add to the other side of it. But, the one thing I will say, Slava, as you're as you're on the other side, if you bring people in early and you really start to incorporate the commercial thinking early on, and Slava, you and I have talked about this, is don't think because you're going to launch on, what's today, September 26th, all of a sudden you're going to be in the black 6 or 12 months down the road. You're not going to be in the black for potentially 24 to 36 months. And one of the biggest mistakes, I think companies like the one we were just talking about, who are late to the game, they're also not well prepared for what they need to do down the road because they don't have the financial, probably don't have the finances in place to to support commercialization 24 months. 24 months is the absolute minimum. If you can start seeing profitability before then, good for you. And I'm glad that the team is doing really well, and congratulations. It's just not too often that I see that. It's usually that 24 to 36 month mark where you start to see the change, and you start to see the brand becoming in the black. And, and that's why when we forecast, or any product I work on, we forecast peak net sales at 5 years. If it's shorter than 5 years, that's great. But we use 5 years because it's a little bit more of a conservative look, and it helps to better prepare the organization and set the right expectations. Obviously, we're going to, sing from the mountaintops if it happens sooner. But, traditionally, what I really try to prepare companies for is 24 to 36 months. And that's the one thing I would say early companies need to think about. Just because you have your money to here, which meaning launch, don't think this is where you got to plan to. You got to plan out to here, which is that 24 to 36 month mark.
Gotcha. Tim, I think this would be a good point for us to wrap up. Give people a few minutes back. I've seen in the chat some excellent ideas for the sort of the next educational event, and it sounds like the next hot topic might be the ERP implementation, ERP choices. So we'll think about that. Maybe talk to a few companies that know more than not in the space. And unless anybody has any last minute quick questions, either unmute yourself or post it. And I would say, Tim, thank you very much. This has been terrific. I know I've learned a lot. And guys, please share your feedback. It helps. It makes our job better. It makes hopefully the organization more useful for everybody. So thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Slava.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Slava. Thanks, John. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the feedback as well. I always like it, and I'm sure it'll be interesting to read. But
awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Yeah,
everybody.
nice to meet everybody. Best of luck to you all.
Slava, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.